Let's get started with the building blocks of management accounting, which is the topic of Chapter 2. One of the most important set of building blocks consists of the terms we use to talk about different costs, different kinds of costs. And we start talking about costs by looking at the value chain. The value chain classifies costs that a firm faces in one of 6 different activities. We have research and development, design, purchase and production, marketing, distribution, and customer service. Now, 5 of these costs, all except for production and purchases, would be present really in any kind of firm, whether it's a service firm or a manufacturing firm or a marketing firm. But production or purchases are costs which apply only to manufacturing and merchandising firms. We call these costs inventoriable product costs. Inventoriable product costs involve either producing a product or buying a product from a producer. All of the other costs are called period costs. So the first thing that we need to understand is the difference between period costs and inventoriable product costs, which apply to this area, production and purchases. And it is inventoriable product costs that I'm going to talk about for the rest of this video. This is my own picture of the Boeing plant that I took during the summer of 2013, when I visited and took a tour of the plant. This picture was taken from the visitor center, and this is about as close as they'll let you take pictures. You can tour the plant, but you can't take pictures. You can't even take your cell phone into the plant. So this is the Boeing manufacturing facility that we looked at in class last week. And I just want to remind you what goes on in this facility. There are 6 different assembly lines, and parts of aircraft start out back here, and the aircraft are constructed as they go through the assembly line, and the finished aircraft comes out of this door. And as I talk about different kinds of costs, I'd like you to picture the aircraft being constructed along this assembly line. I'm going to throw a lot of terms at you, and it can be helpful for some of you to remember these terms and understand these terms by actually picturing what's going on here in the Boeing plant. So just kind of, as I'm talking about them, think about a plane starting out as raw material back here and coming out in front as a finished aircraft. Before we go further, we have to look at one more term, and that term is cost object. A cost object is anything in a firm that managers want a separate measure of cost for. A cost object can be the cost of a cafeteria. It can be the cost of a piece of equipment. It can be the cost of a delivery truck. It can be the cost of research and development. Anything that managers want to know the cost of, anything that managers want a separate measure of cost for, is called a cost object. Now, what we're talking about today are products which are produced in a manufacturing process. And in the specific example we're using, the cost object is an aircraft, in this case a Boeing 787. So let's start out by understanding that the cost object that we're using as an example is this aircraft. And in looking at the various costs involved in putting together this aircraft, just remember that this is the end cost object that we want to determine the total cost of. So, all right. As we've already seen, raw materials enter the production line at the back of the facility, at the beginning of the facility. And raw materials that go into the construction of the aircraft are called direct materials. That's easy enough. All of the materials that go into the plane are direct materials. Now, as you can imagine, dozens of different people work together and work with a lot of different machines in order to construct the aircraft. The people who are directly involved with building this aircraft are called direct labor. Their input is direct labor. Direct labor is the labor which can be identified with a specific product, with a specific aircraft. What we like to say is that direct material and direct labor are costs which can be traced to a specific product. Direct material are costs which we can trace to this specific Boeing 787. Direct labor are labor costs which we can trace, and that's an important word, trace, to this specific Boeing 747. So we start with direct material and direct labor, and those are the costs which can be traced to a specific aircraft. And we call those costs prime costs. Prime costs are the material and labor which go into producing each individual aircraft. All right. So, what other costs are involved? Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in this production facility. We talked about that in class. I think there are 3 different cafeterias in this facility. There's a hospital. There's a gym. There's a fire department within the facility. All of these activities have costs. Now, none of these costs can be traced directly to this aircraft, to this Boeing 787, but they are all costs that are involved in running the facility that produces the aircraft. We call these indirect costs. We have indirect labor. Indirect labor consists of labor that's involved in running the plant, in running the different activities that are going on here, but labor which is not traceable to one specific aircraft, but is rather involved in supporting the manufacturing facility. That is indirect labor. There are a lot of different materials which don't go into the aircraft, but which are involved in running the plant in any case. Things as trivial as a light bulb, for example, are necessary for the plant to operate, but again, they are not traceable. They don't go into an individual aircraft. So we call such things indirect material. Anything from light bulbs to toilet papers, any physical material that does not go into the aircraft, that cannot be traced to an individual aircraft, is called indirect material. So we have indirect labor, we have indirect material, but we have a whole bunch of other costs involved in running this plant. We have a lot of equipment in the plant, and we know that we account for the expense of equipment through depreciation. So we have depreciation of equipment, we have depreciation of the plant itself, we have taxes that have to be paid on the plant. All of this is considered manufacturing overhead, other manufacturing overhead. They're costs that are not labor and are not material, but there are costs that are involved in supporting this manufacturing facility. So we have other manufacturing overhead, which primarily is going to involve depreciation of plant and equipment and taxes. So this is other manufacturing overhead, and again, these are costs which apply specifically to the manufacturing plant. All right. So we now have 3 kinds of indirect costs: indirect labor, indirect material, and other manufacturing overhead. And these are called conversion costs, along with direct labor. Let's look at this again. Direct labor and direct material. These are the direct costs which can be traced to individual examples of the product, to individual aircraft. But then we have labor, both direct and indirect. We have indirect material. We have other manufacturing overhead. All four of these kinds of costs are involved in converting direct material to product. So these four costs, direct and indirect labor, indirect material, and other manufacturing overhead, are called conversion costs. So we make a distinction between prime costs, the direct material and direct labor that go into the aircraft, and conversion costs, which are the costs involved in converting raw material into a finished aircraft. Now, taken all together, these three costs, indirect labor, indirect material, and other manufacturing overhead, are called manufacturing overhead, MOH. Manufacturing overhead or indirect manufacturing costs. Indirect manufacturing costs cannot be traced to individual products. Indirect manufacturing costs instead have to be allocated to products, and we're going to talk about cost allocation of indirect manufacturing costs when we get to Chapter 3. But for now, the distinction that we have to make is the distinction between direct costs, which can be traced to individual aircraft, and manufacturing overhead, indirect manufacturing costs, which cannot be traced to individual aircraft. Taken all together, as I said at the start, these are the inventoriable product costs. These are the 5 kinds of costs that are involved in producing the inventory, in producing the physical product. So taken all together, these are the inventoriable product costs. As we said at the start, the inventoriable product costs, the costs we've just looked at, are all part of this element of the value chain, production and purchases. That's all we've been talking about here is inventoriable product costs, costs in production and purchases. These are not costs which appear anywhere else on the value chain. So, there we have it. Here's the whole picture, and just a quick recap. We have direct costs, direct material, and direct labor costs. These are known as prime costs, and they can be traced to individual products, to individual aircraft. We have indirect costs, indirect labor, indirect material, other manufacturing overhead. This is manufacturing overhead. They are indirect costs. They cannot be traced to individual aircraft. We cannot take these costs and say these costs directly went into an individual plane. Taken together, both labor costs, indirect material, and other manufacturing overhead are conversion costs, the cost of converting direct material to the final product. And again, we've been talking about manufacturing costs, inventoriable product costs. So these are the terms we use when we're talking about costs of a physical product that's manufactured, of a manufactured product. I hope that this video has been useful in understanding these terms. I need you to have watched the video, and I need you to give me some evidence that you've watched it. So what I'd like you to do is sometime between noon and Monday of our second class meeting, sometime between now and noon on Monday of our second class meeting, I'd like you simply to send me an email. Send it to my Gordon College email address, alanb, ALANB, @gordonstate.edu. Please, in the heading, put Accounting 2102 Pre-Class Video. And I'd like you to just think about what you've seen here and what you've learned, and ask me a question about the video. Think about the point which you found, think about what it is in the video that you find most difficult to understand, and ask me a question about that. That will show me that you've looked at the video, and I can also use that to elaborate further on this topic in class. So I hope that you've had a good holiday weekend, and I hope that you're enjoying getting familiar with Chapter 2, and I look forward to seeing you at our next class. Thank you very much.